Well, hi, friends. It's Patrick Kirby from Do Good Better Consulting. Welcome to our first of what I hope to be many article club. And it's like a book club, but we're all busy fundraisers and don't have the time to read an entire book. So I thought we'd do an article club instead and talk about fundraising in small chunks, kind of digest a piece of information that we can kind of wrap our heads around. I thought even a cooler idea would be to grab and ask those who wrote the article to come in and have a discussion with us as well. And I am ecstatic and super pumped to welcome Patrick Rooney to the show. Patrick, how are you?
Great, Patrick. How are you?
I'm doing super fantastic, if you can't even tell, because this is great. Let's give a little bit of a bio on you. I'll brag you up with your title, and then we'll give sort of an introduction. We'll talk about kind of a grand sort of theme of the article. We'll ask some questions. Kind of how this will go is if you have a question, kind of type them into the question box, or raise your hand, and I'll see you, and I will unmute you if you'd like to ask the question face-to-face. And I would like this to be a dialogue and not me babbling the entire time. Because we have super smart people like Patrick with us. And by the way, Patrick is the Executive Associate Dean of Academic Programs and Professor of Economics and Philanthropic Studies at the Lilly School of Philanthropy at Indiana University. Welcome.
Thanks, Patrick.
So maybe you can kind of start off with kind of your background, your bio, how you got to where you are, and why philanthropy and fundraising, specifically for annual giving and sort of large giving. Go.
Okay, sure. So I'm an economist by training, and my original research was on ESOPs, profit-sharing plans, worker participation and management, which I saw as kind of a resolution between the efficiency of capitalism and the social justice equity aspects of socialism by using a kind of a market-based approach to resolve these things. So didn't have anything to do with philanthropy for a long time in terms of my research. My first experience with philanthropy was as a child at Mass, asking my parents, wouldn't say it this way at the time, but saying, what's up with the money going in the basket thing? Because at the time we were pretty broke and didn't have a lot of toys, and you had to eat fast if you want to have a second helping. And so my mother said, your father and I have always felt like we should give, and we should give to the church. And this was pre-ecumenical days, so there was only one true church, I'll tell you. And that we should give till it hurts. And so that's a very different story than what people think about in terms of giving now, I think, in terms of the joy of giving and so on and so forth. But at some point I started working for the chancellor of our campus, and he asked me to do a project on the cost of fundraising at Indiana University and on our campus and overall. And that led to me coming to the Center on Philanthropy as the director of research, and then we started doing the research, writing, and editing for Giving USA, and we did a project for Bank of America on philanthropy among high net worth households, and I've just kind of stayed with it. And when I was the ED of the Center on Philanthropy, when we became a school, I hired Una Osili to be our director of research, and now she's our associate dean for research and international programs. And so she runs a lot of the day-to-day research, contract research, and I work on some of the projects, and I work on some of my own projects. And I've tried to stay literate with the data and involved. And one of the things that I noticed was that in every year for which we've had data, more people have donated than have voted for president. And I thought, wow, that's a really great factoid, right? And that, especially in the current environment where there's a lot of turbulence, that people are expressing their connection to civil society through philanthropy more often than they did in the ballot box. And so to me, that's something about how important that is to be philanthropic and to have philanthropy as an opportunity. But I've been interested in this, that observation, but in one of our data sets, we follow the same 9,000 households every other year and ask them about their giving and volunteering, their income, their net worth, and things like that. And one of the trends we've seen in that is that the percentage donating at all has gone down. And so, so for the first 3 or 4 waves of the data, about 2/3 of the households donated in any one wave, and they donated similar amounts on average. And what I wanted to see, one of the projects I'm working on is, was that the same households every year, or was there dynamic aspects to that? And then with the decline in that, I wanted to try to understand what's going on there for the decline. And so one of the things, on the other hand, we see is in Giving USA is total household giving is going up every year, and total giving overall is going up. And so what's driving some of these differences? And so Ruth McCambridge, who's the managing editor of Nonprofit Quarterly, has said, she's asked me to write some occasional essays for them. And so we were chatting about this trend. She said, I think you'd be the perfect person to write about this. And so really, it was this kind of dialectical process and a conversation with her, and looking at the pieces of giving. So if you look at, household giving's gone up 140% in inflation-adjusted dollars, but total giving excluding households has gone up 439% from 1997 to 2017. So clearly, household giving is going up in a meaningful way, but not going up as fast as other giving. And so one of the things that we see is that non-corporate foundation grant making has gone up 726%. So non-corporate foundations, what that really is individual giving in another form, right? So this is high net worth and ultra high net worth households creating family foundations or private foundations, and for the most part, and now that number does include community foundations, but a big part of this is driven by high net worth and ultra high net worth giving. And so the fact that that's growing at 6 times the rate of household giving over the last 4 decades says there's something different going on there. And so I started looking at, is this growth in giving camouflaging diverse trends? And so one of the things, one hypothesis was, well, is it just foundations? Is that just the key difference? And that's one, and what we decided is that's one of the differences, but not the only one. In fact, so one of the other tables in this article looks at charitable giving among itemizers, right? And pre the new tax bill, about 30% to a third of households were itemizers. And that's going to go down with the new tax bill. But what we see is that in 1993, for example, itemizers of $1 million or more, who their share of charitable contributions was 10% of the total, and for the most recent year for which we have data, 2015, it was 30%. So a huge increase in the share. It's tripling the share of higher income households. And then you look at the phenomenon of DAFs, and I don't need to bore you with those numbers, but it's pretty phenomenal, right? In terms of a trend, the money going into DAFs has more than doubled in the last 4 or 5 years. The money coming out of DAFs has more than doubled in the last 4 or 5 years. So there's something going on there as well. And I'll say I'm not a DAF hater, and I'm not a high net worth donor hater. Mm-hmm. I'm glad they're giving, but at the same time, I am concerned that more households are not giving at all. And what we see is that the households who are not giving at all tend to be middle income and lower middle income households and poor households who are not giving at all.
Right.
And I think this is a bad thing for our society, and it's a bad thing for our civil society. It's a good thing that the wealthy are giving, and it's a good thing they're giving more than they used to. Mm-hmm. But it's an unfortunate part of our civil society that some people are just falling off the page altogether.
Right.
So that was really kind of the genesis of this article and some of the key data points.
Mm-hmm. I had so many questions after I read this, mostly because of it being the end of year and people are sort of looking at their budgets, and if they don't have a major donor in the hopper, or they haven't worked for the last 8 weeks to cultivate some of these major gifts, they're looking at their gap in funding. And probably the only way that they're going to get there is through some of these smaller and medium-sized donations through like an end-of-year appeal. So, I mean, outside of the highest capacity donors giving some major gifts, what is the risk other than, oh, we didn't do enough groundwork early enough to get some major gifts? What is the risk of having so many, or is there a risk of having a lot of high capacity donors and not a lot of smaller donors sort of in your organization, or does it matter?
Yeah. So, Patrick, it may not, so the honest answer is it may not matter in terms of the dollars raised. But what I would argue is from a social welfare society, it matters, because if I'm a charity, if I'm the CEO of the charity, and I can say, look, we've got 10,000 donors, or we've got 5,000 donors, and we represent all people in this catchment area, whether that's nationally, internationally, or locally, that we have people of, diverse income groups, diverse, socioeconomic demographic groups, that we are more representative of our community, however you define that. I think that gives you some bully pulpit strength that is not just about the dollars, right? That, I'm talking to the mayor or the senator or the congressperson, I want to be able to say, we represent our society. And to the extent that we only represent those in the top third of the income group or the top half of the wealth group, then we're not really representing our entire society.
Right.
But from a fundraising perspective, it's absolutely more efficient, right? To have fewer donors, fewer transactions, more zeros. The accountants would like that, right? But I'm not sure it's a good thing for society.
Yeah. It's interesting. We're just beginning in North Dakota. We're just beginning our new legislative season, and part of the topics, it just sort of rolled out a budget this year, and sort of being an ear to the ground for like health and human services and developmental disability community. A lot of those, they make decisions if you don't have a source of a number of donors getting all of your information. And I think people get more information when they're active donors, so that those small donors are getting on the mailing list and they're talking about it. If you don't have the breadth of those small, medium donors, they're not connected. They're not interested. On paper, they're not interested in the goings-ons or the small nuances in some of the legislation, and they don't have a vested interest because they're not in constant contact with some of those things as well. Yeah.
I think another aspect of this is, in the dynamic world that we live in, for the typical charity, you're going to lose some donors every year. Mm-hmm. And if you're not gaining donors, that pipeline is going to get pretty thin and pretty shallow, right? Mm-hmm. And so the large donors of the future typically start out as smaller donors of the past. And if you're not paying attention, it's very efficient to only focus on major donors and planning gifts and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, if you're not bringing in new donors, it's unlikely that you're going to convert people who have had nothing to do with you to becoming a major donor just randomly in the future.
Yeah. One of the questions that was asked was not really a question, but sort of a pushback on the idea that organizations like larger checks. And we do find this in some of the nonprofits. The larger donors, they seem to have a trend now towards, if I'm going to give a larger gift, it's going to come with strings. And because and maybe this has to do, and maybe we can draw a couple of conclusions here, and I'd love to hear from anybody else. But if they're going to have a major gift and they're not as connected to the organization about the importance of a certain program and giving general funds, because they don't have that small communication, they're not sort of involved, they do kind of take those big gifts and they say, well, I want you to do the following 3 things, and only the following three things as we see fit. And I think part of that is restricted funding over the course of the years really kind of limits an organization's ability to progress and expand and do things that they.
Yeah, so this is I think one of the tensions for charities, right? When you're fundraising, the most flexible gifts are the best gifts from the charity's perspective, right? Because the organizations have a lot of discretion and needs change and evolve over time, and so that gives you that ability. From the donor's perspective, they may have something very specific that they want to see accomplished, and so they may want more strings and more less nuance. They may want more directives around it, right? And I think as fundraisers, we have to kind of do that tightrope between we don't want to be just chasing dollars, but at the same time, sometimes you can find a sweet spot that it's, a donor gives some restrictions,
Mm-hmm.
but it also helps us. For example, we just got a gift from the McKinney Foundation, and they're interested. Their interest is made mostly around environmental issues, and so that they're going to fund fellowships for 4 of our students over the next few years who want to work in environmental organizations. Well, it turns out a lot of our students want to work in environmental organizations, so that's a pure win-win.
Mm-hmm.
But if they were funding four students to do that and we only had one, then that could be a mismatch. And they're going to fund a faculty member. We're going to do a search for a faculty member next year on environmental sustainability and philanthropy. And there's no position like that anywhere in the world right now. So I don't know what the supply of labor is like. So that could be in a really important string that might make it hard to fill, but it also will help us, fill a niche that I think will be important to society.
Right. One of the things that was encouraging, and I know the idea is as sort of I have a heartfelt thing for annual giving. It's kind of, I just like the idea of this, and I think it matched well with kind of your thought on the more engaged they are, the more doors that they open up. But one of the things that was super encouraging is sort of this emphasis on abundance. I think a lot of small or medium-sized nonprofits who take small and medium-sized gifts don't think that there is enough money for everybody, and they look at some of these larger organizations or institutions that get some of these large 7-8 figure checks, and they say, well, maybe not us, we're not really a thing. I think one of the things that you found, or it was interesting in your data points, was how much money there is and how much money there is being donated, and that everybody has the ability to grab a piece of this pie. I think that was super encouraging to look at those numbers, even though they kind of trend from the smaller gifts a little larger, but the larger gifts, I mean, it's there for the taking, kind of, right?
Yeah, I think one of the lessons in fundraising, I think, is be bold. Have a bold vision, and if you're going out and asking a donor or prospective donor for a gift, the worst outcome is they're going to say no, but they're not going to. I had dinner last night with a donor and his wife, and he was telling us, I don't think anybody in your shop has asked me for my usual year-end gift. And I said, yeah, I'll make sure that happens tomorrow. He said, do I need to call someone to tell them to ask me? And I said, no, I'll make sure you get asked. But that was somebody that I cultivated for a long time as a prospective donor for a large gift, and he ultimately decided to give that to a different organization. And on the one hand, it was disappointing. On the other hand, we went to dinner last night to celebrate that gift, and he said, "I'm buying dinner because I want to help. I want to thank you for helping me discern how I should make this gift and where and the criteria and so on." And ultimately they chose a different organization, but we're still friends, and we're still going to go see them in Florida, in January or February, and all these relationships still continue. But there are, and it's not a household name, so, but he's making a $9 million gift. And so, but that's a relationship that's gone on for a long time, and, might have come here. A lot of our biggest gifts have come from people who are not alumni of our program or have had anything to do with Indiana University.
Interesting.
But they love the beauty and the power of philanthropy, and they're moved by kind of the magic of that. And so I think if you can reach out to donors, the problem, the challenge is, of course, finding them or them finding you, and then having those conversations, having that opportunity to have those conversations. My youngest son goes to a Catholic high school, and they were doing a capital campaign, and they're going through a capital campaign right now. And they asked us to be on their leadership committee. And my wife was like, "Oh, this will be right up your alley. You'll be great at this, blah, blah, blah." I mean, I'm ashamed. I was terrible at this, kind of retail fundraising, because I couldn't get past people's voicemail. People were, I got signed 20 people I didn't know, and leave voicemail, leave a voicemail, leave a voicemail. It's like, they don't call you back. What do you do? And it's very different than going to major donors and or foundations that either you already know, or they've expressed some interest or connectivity, or they know who we are organizationally, and someone on our staff sets up the meeting, and I just show up. Well, I can show up and deliver a good message. Getting that first appointment, that's tough work.
It's fun. It's funny, and that I think matches really well with your insistence kind of earlier with what the importance of these smaller and medium-sized gifts. You cast that wide net. You then get people a lot to talk about why you are that part of that organization. So when you do call and they know that you are from X organization, they've already been primed because they have constant communication with that. And I think that's more to your point. I think that's if we're abandoning, a lot of organizations are abandoning these smaller gifts, and we're not concentrating on some of those. It does have, I think, social impact, but it also has a storytelling impact. If not a lot of people know who you are, where are you going to cultivate those medium-sized gifts that get to the big gifts, that get to the $9 million gifts, and then sending people like yourself to leave voicemails for a couple of days after a campaign. I think it's a very important point, especially at the end of the year. And it does come back to storytelling as well, where if your story doesn't sort of elevate above, and you're not concentrating in your local community and kind of things. One of the things that I chuckled about too is that, and we laugh about this in fundraising circles, though, nobody's ever punched anybody in the face for asking for a gift. I've yet to see that article written in Nonprofit Quarterly. Man punched in face for asking for a gift like that.
I will say on a couple of occasions I wanted to punch them in the face.
Very true.
Or how they've treated me or our CEO when we were out together and stuff like that. But I haven't done it. But still, yeah. I may have a book that I do after retirement on donors behaving badly, and so I think that'd be a fun book to write.
I think you could have pre-sales immediately. Just doing this for a couple. You just have a cartons of books. We would all chip in a chapter. I'm sure you could crowdsource that pretty easily. Can you talk a little bit about donor advised funds? This is something that I think a lot of nonprofits are confused by, encouraged by, don't want to talk about it because we're uninformed about it. And there's a bad rap on one end, right? So Silicon Valley injecting billions into a couple of these high-end ones. And then there's a confusion on even local community foundations that have some of these donor-advised funds that are kind of taking some of these larger donors and kind of housing them. And I know that the idea is not to sit like Smaug from The Hobbit on all the money and just sit there and corral run. But how is it like? Explain the benefits. Explain some of the perceived negativity, and how can smaller or medium-sized nonprofits get into the donor-advised fund game as far as you've seen?
Yeah, yeah. I think those are all important and fair questions. So, and this is trickier waters than I ever expected to be. So, Ruth McCambridge asked me to write an essay for NPQ on with the growth in donor advised funds was Giving USA, and for which we do the research, writing, and editing, was Giving USA double counting gifts.
Oh,
and so so that was the genesis of the essay I wrote for them. And it turned out, and she said, "Oh, and by the way, why don't you address these other things like why are they so damn popular, and why are they growing so much, and then some other things that Ruth wanted me to cover." And so, and I have to say, I got more negative feedback about that article from the DAF haters than I have anything I've ever written in my life. And I started to write a response to one of them, and just starting to write the response took more time than it did to write the essay. And so I was like, okay, I just can't do this, because the other piece was my response to their response was just going to generate another response. And, so it's kind of like, if you only believe Catholicism is the one true faith, you're probably not going to switch to another faith, right? I mean, it was like a theological argument rather than a factual argument. It was at least starting to feel like that. So, I mean, I'll say that I think the benefits are, the key benefits are, one, that in the current tax environment, that many people who were itemizers in the past are going to be non-itemizers most years. And if they have the cash flow such that they can bundle several years worth of gifts in 1 year, they can get the tax deduction this year and then spread out the giving across several years. Now, and you could do that with any one charity, but it gives you more discretion to control the timing and allocation with a DAF, perhaps. So, for example, if I gave our parish $20,000 this year instead of $5,000 over 4 years, Monsignor Tony might think, "Oh, we're going to give $20,000 a year going forward," or he's going to think it's really odd that I gave him $20,000 1 year and for the next 4 I gave him 0. Right? I mean, he'd be like, "Patrick, you're killing my budget here," and not that difference would make the difference, but you know what I mean. So it may be confusing to people. Whereas we continue to do the same amount coming from a DAF, then that makes cash flow easier for the charity. I think the other thing that DAFs allow donors to do is, if they have a liquidity moment, and either through an inheritance, sale of a business, or a building, or their home, and they have a lot of cash all at once, and they know that they want to make a commitment to philanthropy for a large chunk of this or a small chunk of it, but they want to make a permanent commitment to philanthropy. Sometimes these deals happen pretty fast, right? And you don't always know long in advance that you're going to be bought out, or you may not know that you're getting this inheritance. And so you can make that commitment to philanthropy without figuring out all the details of who, what, where, when, and why. And the DAF allows you this kind of holding station to make those decisions. Now, one of the downsides, of course, is how long you're holding it in that holding station. And so I'll come back to that. And I think, I think the other thing is that it allows the anonymous aspect of it, allows donors to say, I've already identified that I'm Catholic, right? So my wife might want to give a gift to Planned Parenthood. Well, if my mother saw that my family was giving a big gift to Planned Parenthood, she'd think that I was going to go to hell, my wife was going to go to hell, and that she was going to go to hell as my mother for not raising me better to not give to Planned Parenthood. And this is nothing against Planned Parenthood. This is just,
Yeah.
a what if, right? And but so you can imagine gifts like that, though, that I might still want to make,
Mm-hmm.
or my wife might want to make, but that we might want to make them anonymously. And in fact, most gifts coming out of DAFs are not anonymous. So you know who to steward, you know who to cultivate, and so on. It's just that the gut does give you that flexibility, and sometimes, I may not want other members of my parish or my children or my neighbors to know, oh, you're making real gifts. I mean, real. All gifts are real, but you're making really big gifts.
Right.
And so I may want to keep some anonymity to protect my personal space or my political space or my familial space in a way that making gifts, more directly to charities might violate that.
Mm-hmm.
So I think those are the key motivations. I think that the DAF haters point to a couple things, and one is that they're less transparent, right? And so foundations are required to identify who they make their grants to. DAFs are not. DAFs money can be moved from one DAF to another, and now transactionally, those are each individual transactions. From a Giving USA perspective, I won't bore you with the accounting, but we only count that once. We don't, it counts as a gift when you make the gift to the DAF, and it counts as a distribution when you make but it only counts once. So, the transactions between DAF accounts, is not double counted. But so there's a lack of transparency. There's a lack of accountability. There's a lack of, the fact that they can be anonymous. Some fundraisers don't like that because you don't know who the gift came from.
Mm-hmm.
Well, here's we've had 2 or 3 large gifts come from DAFs
Mm-hmm.
in our shop, and we know who they're from, and they were already connected to us in some way, and it was convenient for them to make that gift from their DAF account,
Mm-hmm.
and we gave them credit for it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if they wanted to be anonymous, and that's their choice. That's okay. And I think it has been, someone can make an anonymous gift already, and so a DAF just makes it easier and more anonymous than it is if you say, I'm going to make an anonymous gift to you. I don't want to report it on your annual report and public documents. That's legal, but I know that you made that gift, so I can continue to cultivate and steward you.
Right.
The DAF changes that dynamic. But there's some people who want to make a gift and they don't want to be bothered, right?
Yep.
And this is a way of enabling that. So, I think if you do kind of a marginal cost, marginal benefit analysis, I come out in favor of DAFs. Now, this, one of the things about the parking lot question, which you hear is, most of the commercial DAF funds and Silicon Valley Community Foundation and others are creating rules that if your account is inactive for 2 or more years, they start taking money out and making grants on your behalf. And if it's inactive for very long, they take the entire amount and put it into their general corpus and make grants from that. So that's not required by law. So, there's a risk that is not honored everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
But it is, in fact, a permanent commitment to philanthropy. Ultimately, it's going to be given. Yeah. And the question is, with how long of a time lag?
Right. you finished your article, and I know that you're a big proponent for a couple of solutions to the change in the tax code and how people deduct charitable gifts. Because I think one of the main concerns when the tax cut happened is some of the larger institutions, not so many of the smaller ones, the larger institutions kind of threw up some red flags and said, whoa. Increasing the deductions to 24 grand is going to really limit the amount of people who are going to itemize, which means their incentive kind of goes away. Some states have sort of a state tax deduction that they go to sort of a charitable charitable annuity or whatever those are. But then they've now double dipping. And so now the feds are going to look in. Your solutions are pretty interesting. So kind of maybe walk through your solutions for charitable gift deductions and what that looks like and how that's impacting some of these nonprofits. And that, I think it's super curious and to most of us who aren't under the hood. So,
yeah. So, I think the simplest thing would be if Congress passed a universal deduction. So, that would say any gift by anybody, whether an itemizer or not, is tax deductible. Now, obviously, if you're a higher income tax bracket, the tax deduction is bigger than for someone who's in a lower income tax bracket. But nonetheless, it's tax deductible, and so it creates the right incentive to give and so on. I think the charitable tax deduction has been a part of the tax code for all but 4 years that we've had federal income taxes. And so, it's a way of saying we honor and respect the fact that people can self-select how they want to fund public goods and which public goods they want to fund. And so I think that's, it's been an important part of our history and our value system. So let's extend that same values and respect to all households, not just households that have high enough income to be itemizers, especially now when it's not going to be the top 30%, it's going to be the top 5 or 10% of households that are itemizers. And so I think, we have to, think about the dynamic aspect of that. I think for the other thing that the universal deduction says is that all gifts, big and small, are valuable regardless of your income. And so I think that it creates a better alignment with our societal values and with the philanthropic capacity of all individuals. And so, and empirically what we know is that people don't give just because of the taxes. That would be irrational. You're always, if you only care about yourself, your financial well-being, you're better off not giving anything to anyone, right? So, it's silly to say people are only giving because of the tax deduction. They're giving for other reasons, but the tax deductibility creates an incentive to give, or it doesn't. But I think the other thing is for people who have been itemizers and now will become non-itemizers, their cost of giving $1 went from 60 cents after taxes to $1. Well, maybe that's how it ought to be. Okay, I mean, that's a different question. But, if the cost of buying a loaf of bread went from 60 cents to $1, you might think differently about how many loaves of bread you buy. And similarly, add on more zeros and, house, cars, and those types of decisions. So I think that, the taxes do play a role in the incentives. It's not the only reason people give. And for many, it's not the primary reason people give. But it does affect, for some people, where they give, whether they give, and how much they give.
Yeah, that's awesome. This has been remarkably informative for a whole host of reasons, and I really wanted to thank you for the time. We're going to post sort of links to your other articles below as we sort of repost this everywhere. And so people can know how to find you and then refer to you as where they learned all of these brilliant things. And thank you so much, not only for writing the article, I think it was really informative for everybody, but to be our first guest on our article club. This was super fun, and it was great. And Go Irish. Let's do that.
Thank you. Go Irish. Yeah.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure meeting you over the interwebs. Thanks for everybody stopping by. Thanks for everybody watching in the replay. And have yourself a fantastic rest of the day.
Thanks, Patrick. You too.
Thanks, friends.
Bye-bye.